Okay, fantastic. Hi, everybody. Yay. Rushika, if we started with some music, what music would you want to start with?
What would probably something classical. I'm really into like just instrumentals.
Some like calming music that would let people come in.
Yes.
I think I would probably go the exact opposite and put on some Lizzo, I think.
Good choice.
Or Jackson 5 is always my fave.
Yeah.
Love good old Jackson 5. Little dance music to get us going.
Yeah.
There's a new musical on Broadway right now called & Juliet, and it has all this amazing music from like Britney and NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, but it's like in the musical. Anyway, so that's really good music too.
I've heard about it.
It's supposed to be good. If you are just joining us, we're just talking about what music, if you were starting a webinar, what music would you have in the background? So feel free to throw some music in the chat if you want. What your favorite kind of music is. We'll wait, I think, one more minute and then we can start. I've seen some of these webinars that start with music that I feel like that would be, it like gets people.
Good idea.
Get people in the mood, but I don't think anybody wants to hear me sing, so maybe we'll just not.
Or a video.
Yeah, video would be
Beyonce, good. Of course.
Of course.
That's true.
Of course.
That would be a fantastic way to start a webinar.
Yes, it's true. Because nobody's going to break our soul tonight.
Let's do it. Rock, folk. Somebody one-ups Beyonce, of course.
Of course. Okay. What do you think? Should we start away?
Let's do it.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad that you are joining us today. Thrilled to partner with my dear friend, Rushika, to talk to you about this really phenomenal, important subject that we hope will really help you in your future endeavors with talent. So let's just jump right in. So often we hear organizations speak about human capital, human resources. They often say to us that they think that the candidates who apply would be lucky to work for their own organization. And so I'm urging you today for the next 45 minutes and maybe longer for you to flip your thinking. Let's focus on the people. Let's focus on the candidates, on the word talent. Let's focus on how each and every individual that would agree to work at our organizations would only add to the culture, to the mission, and make our organizations stronger. Let's flip our thinking to say we would be the lucky ones. We are the ones that would grow and become stronger as our organization because of this new talent, because of these wonderful, phenomenal humans. We, as organizations, need to sell ourselves. We need to promote our leadership so that they can attract the very best talent. And if we all go into every search thinking that this could be our next leader, who then would produce the next leader, who would then produce the next leader, you are immediately showing that new hire or that potential candidate that they will matter and that they'll make an impact on the organization and, of course, in the world. So that is our focus at DRG, talent. Our goal is to partner with mission-driven organizations and bring them the very best talent. And our goal for today, as I already shared, is to share with you some strategies so that you can flip your thinking and focus on the candidate so that you can recruit the very best talent. So, who are you? What brings you here today? Share with us in the chat. What are you looking to learn? What do you want to come away from this webinar understanding or having a deeper understanding of? Tell us where you're coming from. Tell us what brings you here. Don't be shy. We want to make sure that we're answering your questions. Well, Rushika, why don't we start with you? What brings you here? What are you excited to learn?
I'm excited about the intersection between this approach that you're talking about and that I'm thinking about with you and diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, diversifying organizations, diversifying leadership positions. It's so critically important for addressing the times and all of the things we see happening in the world and the missions of our organizations. And when you have an approach that's so highly tailored and curated to the needs of individuals, I think that that is so profoundly effective in being able to accomplish goals in the DEI space. So that's what brings me here, and that's what I'm really interested about.
We're so happy you're here.
I do see some comments here. Just some appreciation around the information that you're offering, that we're offering. People wanting to learn from expertise in this space. Recruiters looking for ways to help candidates, especially Black, Indigenous, people of color candidates that are underrepresented, at the highest levels. And another question, how can I put my best foot forward with all the candidates right from the first interaction with them, which is just a perfect question for this webinar.
Great. What a great question to set us up.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Okay, well, let's jump in. Please continue to put your comments in the chat so that we can make sure that we're answering your questions. So the first step we wanted to talk about is investing in candidates. Investing time, information, and being consistent. So what we do at DRG is we build relationships with our candidates from the very beginning, from the very, very first call that we have. And it's really one of my favorite parts of my role. As my husband says all the time, I make best friends with a wall. It's one of the things that I do well. And so for me, I go deep very quickly and I build deep relationships from the very beginning. So spend time to get to know these candidates. Spend the time. I know it takes a lot of time, and I know as hiring managers or board chairs that are running these searches on your own and you have a full-time job, I know it takes time. I promise you it's worth it. In my very first call with my candidates, I don't ask them any questions. So I let them ask me questions about the role, about the organization. They ask questions about kind of where they are in their career trajectory. And I want to make sure that at the end of that call, I ask them the question, do you feel comfortable? Are you excited? Are you ready to throw your hat in the ring? And I think that's putting, again, the talent first. It's putting them first and foremost so that it's their decision. Are they ready to put their hat in the ring? And it's a half an hour call. It's not like it's 4 hours. It's a half an hour. So I know it takes time, but I think that it's really helpful for candidates to feel like they have whatever questions they have in the beginning, that they're getting them answered before they jump into the search. Information. So I give them information so that they can be successful. And this is a little bit about what I wrote in my article about the more information that you can give your candidates, the better. Because this is not, as Mark Prine, our organizational psychologist, always says, we're not looking for people to be exceptional at interviewing. We want them to be a phenomenal CEO or a chief development officer or a phenomenal manager. So give them information, tell them who they're meeting with. Who are these people? What are their roles? And why would this future role interact with these folks? You want to give them the information. And as we always know, information is power. And be consistent. Don't just do it in the first call. Do it in the second round and the third round of interviews. If you have 3 rounds of interviews, you want to continually prep them. You want to give them the time, the information to continually prep them and make sure that they feel like they are taken care of. So we have a couple of quotes throughout our time together. So this was a quote that I love. Too often, these hiring processes are cloak and dagger, like some James Bond movie. Discretion is, of course, important, and we all know that. But being open and honest about the process, where a candidate stands, the challenges and opportunities, was a feature of my process with you. Any questions or things that we're seeing in the chat that we want to kind of highlight before we jump into the next kind of section?
Well, there's a question here around how one can put their best foot forward with all candidates right from the first interaction with them, as well as developing a structure that allows for a hiring process that is uniform each and every time we're on a search.
Yeah. So any thoughts on that, Rushika? What do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm particularly compelled by this question around each and every time, because for equity,
Yeah.
that's incredibly important. I plan to talk about that a little bit more as we move forward in the presentation.
Great. So I think it's interesting because I do believe that you want to have it uniform every time, and also feel free to edit, right? Like if something's not working, you don't need to stick to that process. I know that I think all of us at DRG are continually thinking about how do we improve our process. And so the key is, how do we put the candidate first? And how do we try and continue to be as open and honest about the process? And hopefully we'll continue to give you some tips. But really making sure that there is a strong process, I think is a great goal for you. And then always evaluating is always the key to success. Okay, great. So the next piece is leaning into being in the middle to an extent. So I am well aware. I'm well aware that in my role at DRG, we're in a very unique place because we are this outside voice that comes into searches, and we have the unique ability to be in between candidates and search committees, or candidates and hiring managers. And so I understand that we get to really lean into being in the middle in a really thoughtful way, that we get to that we really get to advocate and be transparent to both parties and really be the middle. And yet I still believe, and I've thought about this a bunch, that as hiring managers or chief talent officers or board chairs or CEOs, that you can take pieces of what does it mean to quote, quote, be in the middle, and really use it to your own advantage. So for instance, try to be as transparent as possible. I partnered with an organization last year that in the job description, they not only stated the process that each candidate was going to go through, but they gave date ranges. So they said, the first step is this, and you will know by this date. And the next step is this, and you will know by this date. And I thought to myself, wow, that is transparency at its best. Because not only do you know what the process is, but you also know when you're going to know what the next step is. And so you can expect. So often I hear from candidates, thank you so much, Sarah, for calling me. Sometimes I never hear back from search committees, or I never hear back from hiring managers. So the key here is to just try and be as transparent as possible. And then I would just say, being an advocate, I think there's also a way, as I said, we're very lucky that we get to advocate both on behalf of an organization and on behalf of the candidate. And sometimes I've heard from organizations at the end of our search, Sarah, are you working for us at the organization, or are you working for the candidate? And I often say back to them, I have to work for both of you, because if the candidate's not happy, they're not going to say yes. And if you're not happy, you're not going to make the offer. And so I would urge you to be an advocate in some way for the candidate, and tell them that you want to be an advocate for them. Tell them that your goal is to bring them into this process. And that you use the word advocate, that you know that there are people on both sides, and that the key here is to be that advocate. And so that transparency and advocacy, I think, can really help with continuing to bring folks in a really thoughtful way. And so here's another quote. It felt like you understood that there were people on both sides of the table, and your job was to acknowledge the imperfections of the people and process and find the best fit in what is inherently an imperfect undertaking, because people are flawed by their nature. So that honesty made the process feel authentic and comfortable. And so being honest, I think, will really bring your organization to a new level and your relationship with candidates to a new level, because they'll see that, they'll feel that.
Yeah, there's just a note here around this transparency and how it really relieves the candidate of anxiety, right? That comes across
Yes.
from an interview or hiring, process. And it really allows them to put their best foot forward because they know exactly what to expect. It's transparent, and they can really focus on what their strengths are. And you can focus on seeing
Yes.
them at their best.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's great. Any questions that you feel like, especially about this? I know this is so hard because you have to advocate for your organization. I know it's a hard piece of this. But I think about, in organizations where I've worked, how could I have been, a better advocate for the candidate that I was trying to hire with either my boss or even when I was an executive director? How could I have advocated in a different way, and been more transparent to really make sure that the goal here is, of course, that every single candidate wants this job, right? Like every single step of the process, you want to continue to edit your process so that every single candidate wants this job at the end, and that at the end, the number one candidate says yes. Okay, great. Any other questions, or we'll just continue to go? Okay, great. So giving feedback, this is, I think, probably one of the hardest parts. What happens when you have to say no, right? Only one person can get the job. And I have really struggled. I've really struggled with how do I create a strategy to give feedback? Because there have been times where I've not done it well. How do you tell a candidate no, even though it's a terrible feeling to tell that candidate no? And so throughout my career, I've really thought about how do you best say no to the candidate, and how do you kind of engage them, continue to engage them in the process. And so I'll say two things. The first is I have now, my new strategy now is when I hear from a search committee that they've decided to move forward with one or two candidates, and I have other candidates who they've said no to, I send them an email as soon as possible. And I say, unfortunately, I don't have great news for you. The search committee decided not to move forward with your application. I would love to set up a time to talk to you about it. And I think, at least for now, and it may change next week, but that gives the candidate a moment to process, a moment to be either upset or frustrated or angry, and then writes back and says, yes, I would like to spend some time getting that feedback. And then again, trying to put talent first, trying to put the candidates first, it then provides them with a space that they can then come to the table and say, okay, I'm ready for the feedback. Again, I have not been great at this in the beginning, and I've really tried to continue to communicate quickly, because you don't want to leave candidates hanging. You don't want to leave talent hanging, which goes to my second bullet, which is if you have done what we're talking about and you've really built the relationships from the beginning and you have that deep connection with these candidates, you also want to continue to stay in touch with them, because who knows what role you're going to have in a couple months or in a year or 2 years that they might be perfect for. And so the key here is also, like, how do you give feedback that might help them in their next interview? but how do you also give feedback to say, I really enjoyed meeting you, and these are the 3 or 4 things that I think you are phenomenal at. And if we have a role in the future, I am really excited about coming back to you and talking to you. Again, it goes back to the beginning. It takes time, it takes energy. That, of course, is a very different phone call than, hi, I'm sorry you didn't get the job, and hanging up, right? It's a very different interaction. But think about how that candidate will talk about the process and talk about your organization and talk about you in a very different way. I remember that I was once a candidate for a role, and the hiring manager said he would call me at a certain day. And I, of course, waited by the phone all day. I got a call, but I was in the other room. And then I came back and I called right back, and he didn't pick up the phone. And then a half an hour later, I called back, he didn't pick up the phone. And that is a terrible place. I didn't hear back from him for like 3 hours. That's a terrible place to be in for the candidate. And I'll never forget that feeling in the pit of my stomach. Like, what was he going to say? Yes or no? So the key here is to really, again, think about all of the anxiety that's going through with these candidates, and really making sure that the talent sticks.
Sarah, I just really appreciate the ethics behind your approach. I mean, it's really so aligned with the institutions you're representing, as well as the clients, or, you know, the people that you're working with. I mean, I just feel like the approach is so morally sound, and I really love that aspect. We do have an important question here from a participant. What advice would you give for those who want to honor this principle of transparency, but just also might have limited information that they're available to share? And then another question around feedback. Do you ever ask for feedback at the end of a search? You know, is it from the client or the candidates? Like, what does your feedback, your formalized feedback process look like?
Yeah. Great. Those are wonderful questions. I think what I would say about honoring transparency is you give them as much as you can, share with them that you're giving them as much as you can, and be honest about that. And then I think, and again, I don't know your situation. You can feel free to email me. I'm happy to talk to you offline. But I think I'd probably start pushing whoever you need to push to be more transparent, to say, I sat through this webinar, and if we really want exceptional candidates, we need to be more transparent. Is there any way that we can be a little bit more transparent, right? Not knock down all the walls, but how do we try and be just a little bit more transparent? And then maybe next year you're a little bit more transparent. I think, though, communicating with the candidates to say, this is as much as I can give you, will go a long way. And being honest is really powerful, I would say. And again, I'm happy to keep talking about that. It's a really important question. Yes, and asking for feedback for sure. So I, after a search closes, I spend I give them, after we get a signed contract, give them a couple weeks to take a breath. And then I actually set up a time to speak with the clients one-on-one, to say, how did the process land for you? What were things that we did well? What were things that we didn't do well? And because, again, it's a way of closing the search, of closing the relationship in a really important and thoughtful way, because I want to continue those relationships as well. Candidates, I think what I try and do is ask for feedback throughout the search, but not in as much as of a formal way. But I continue to say, like, okay, what else do you need from us? What aren't you getting that we could give more to? What information do you feel like we need to give you more so that you can be stronger? Is there something that I need to be doing more to help you throughout this process? I think every single email I send to candidates, I say, let me know how I can help you further. But it would be interesting, to your point and question, if we could formalize, how would we formalize that process? And how would we be able to get, more feedback? But I do try throughout the process to continue to ask, how else can I be helping you? Because I think that it is such an anxiety-filled and it just takes a lot of energy to go through a search, any kind of search. And so I think throughout the process, I think is key for working with candidates, I would say. And then just our quote, and this is something that, again, I try really hard to do, is to follow up, even if it's a short message to say that you will follow up later that day or that week. This is important to alleviate the anxiety that comes with silence during the search. I appreciated the knowledge of the stress involved with going through, I appreciated that we had the knowledge of the stress involved with going through the process. And so that's something that we talk a bunch about at DRG, and a lot of my colleagues talk about this a bunch, is how do you follow up? And even if you don't have information, how can you just say, I don't have any information for you, but I'm thinking about you and I will get you information as soon as I have it. Or sometimes I'll share with candidates who I'm doing an interview with, at this moment, here's where we are in the search. You probably won't hear from me for 2 or 3 weeks. If you need anything, I'm here. Don't hesitate to reach out. And otherwise, you'll hear from me at by this week. Again, trying to be as transparent as possible.
Sarah, there's a question here around confidentiality. What kind of candidate information do you keep confidential?
What kind of candidate information do you keep confidential? Maybe there's
Right, and so in honoring transparency and advocating for your for your client,
yeah.
What are the areas that are sort of where you're inclined to just keep information confidential? How do you make that call?
I think I really ask them,
Mm-hmm.
right? What information do you want me to share with the client, and what information do you not want to? I tend to also ask them, what is the most important thing, or what are the 3 or 4 most important things that you need to say yes? If the other things are not as important, but you still want me to push for them, I'm happy to continue to push. But what are the most important things? And then if they say to me, well, I'm feeling this and I'm thinking about this, I always ask, can I share it? And if they say no, then I absolutely do not share it. And if they say yes, then I think it's really about, again, asking them which information, because there's a lot of pieces that go into it. Again, at the end, the negotiation pieces, there's so many that are personal, right? That are really personal pieces. And hopefully we'll get candidates to say yes, but we have to be careful about what pieces are information, or what pieces are confidential. And I think to those of you out there who have worked with search committees who sometimes ask questions that are not appropriate, I usually push back on search committees and hiring managers if they ask me, well, what about this, or what about this? Fill in the blank with all of the questions that you could think are not the right questions. I say, that's not an appropriate question. I don't have the answer. And it's really focused. That's not what we're focusing on. We're focusing on the work. And so trying to make sure that we that we allow the candidates to keep some things confidential, whatever they need to be confidential. Okay, great.
Okay, so thanks so much, Sarah. I'm just going to focus in my brief comments around how this candidate-centered approach you're proposing here and that you practice has just been absolutely fundamental for advancing the diversity of senior leadership. I've been doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work for almost 20 years, and I was some time ago working with a senior leader, a woman of color, who was very transparent about the fact that she was being heavily recruited by organizations across the country. For her, gaining a competitive salary wasn't as much of a challenge What was challenging was finding an organizational culture that was just really well aligned with the totality of her requirements, right, for her to experience career satisfaction. So this candidate, like many highly sought after candidates, would not have been successfully recruited if it wasn't for a more personalized and high touch approach throughout her experience. So taking care of candidates then from an inclusion and equity perspective is really about creating space for candidates' voices to be heard and structuring a candidate experience that is transparent with high communication that provides for just a really well curated, tailored, culturally responsive overall experience. So, for example, another highly accomplished person of color shared that the opportunity to mentor and develop future leaders amongst other demographic minorities within an organization was crucially important for her. And she credited such mentoring efforts as being a major force behind her own success. And so for her, joining an organization that allowed her to give back in the way that she felt, was given to her as she was mentored through her career, this was incredibly important for her. And she needed to see in a candidate recruitment process how she would have an opportunity to meet this deep and almost profound driving need that she had, right? That landed her towards her own path, towards success. And so, as part of her candidate experience, she was provided with opportunities to meet organization members who had expressed their own desire for mentoring through the DEI initiatives that were represented throughout the organization. And then those members of the organization were given the opportunity to provide feedback, which was really wonderful for building a culture that sustains DEI progress both internally, as well as externally. So this candidate then in turn shared that she felt heard, that she felt seen, and those future leaders within the organization also reported having felt the same. So taking care of candidates is also a way of really taking care of your own people.
Absolutely. And I think, Rushka, you and I have talked about this at length, is about that goes to the values of the organization, right? What are your values? And like you just said beautifully, how can your process show your values?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and so this process and facilitating this kind of an inclusive experience has all multiple clear benefits, right? You're building trust around organizational culture and values by making candidates feel seen, heard, and valued before they even work for you. And so somebody in the comments asked the question, how do I put my best foot forward? That's exactly how you put your best foot forward. You make candidates understand that you value their perspective, you value their experiences, you're open to their ideas, you want to be pushed, you want leaders who will lead in across institutional priorities, and creating space for that conversation I think is so powerful. This caring approach also allows you to structure opportunities for candidates to highlight and select their own, the breadth of their own strengths and interests within your interview process, and to explore where those strengths, which may be new for your organization, can align with institutional priorities. And it also provides candidates with the opportunity to experience the diversity of your organization. And if you are struggling in this area, an opportunity for you to be transparent and forthright about the strategies and partnerships you're prioritizing to address your organizational ambitions around DEI. And so I just really like this high touch approach to communicating with candidates from day one. Um, Okay. Okay, so yeah. I also want to highlight the impact of systematizing this approach. So while on the one hand, we definitely want a curated approach that highlights the uniqueness of each candidate's strengths and abilities and makes their voices heard, you also want to systematize the approach so it's standard practice and the benefits are experienced evenly across candidates, right, regardless of their identity. When you make this approach standardized and consistent, you increase equity, you reduce the risk of bias, and you establish more. Sorry, I'm getting. And you establish more transparency internally and externally around how candidates can expect to experience your organization, which is a really good thing for your culture and your reputation. For example, in DEI spaces, we sometimes see organizations really go out of the way to provide high quality candidate experiences to those candidates who also happen to occupy privileged social identities around age, around gender, around race, or on the other hand, go out of the way to provide such experiences only when recruiting diverse candidates, right? Which can feel like tokenism within the organization or even external to the organization. So with a systematized approach, in doing this consistently, you're sending a message that you have principles around equity, principles around fairness that are driving your process and driving, by implication, your organization. So you'll want to ensure that each leadership candidate really receives a similar standard of quality attention. And I also just want to end with mentioning how this approach to caring, it also allows candidates to confidentially engage around the policies, initiatives, and benefits you have in place for diverse needs. For example, domestic partner benefits or parental and maternity benefits. These are questions that candidates aren't always sure whether they can ask about or how to ask about them, but really need the opportunity to be able to explore and on their own terms in a way that, that brings them comfort and a feeling of safety. And so building these opportunities into your standardized process so candidates aren't in a position to have to ask or feel awkward around asking. It's just a really important aspect and benefit of this approach, Sarah, that you're asserting. So
I'm so happy that you jumped in about the benefits piece because at DRG we've spent a lot of time talking about when do we talk about salary, when do we talk about benefits. I remember there was once a search where I talked about salary in the very beginning, but then I didn't talk about it again until there was an offer. And there was a difference that the candidate felt like they needed more. And that put me in a really hard situation. And so from then on, we have these conversations with candidates in the very first conversation about, what are you looking for to make this move? And not just salary, right? I mean, I think that's what's so important for all of you to understand is that it's not just, yes, it's about the number, but it's also about all the things, Rushika, you just said. All the benefits that are really needed, and every single person is going to need different things. And so how do you build that trust and really try and understand? I've even seen job descriptions that are putting benefits, again, transparency, putting benefits in their job description so that it's clear from the very beginning about what they can offer. And really trying to be transparent about those benefits too. And then continue, and then we try really hard to continue to check in with candidates about what they need as they continue to learn about the work. Then they continue to think about, okay, what do I need to be able to do this work? And that's an important part of the conversation too. So I'm so glad you brought that up about those benefits.
Okay, at this time, we're going to just open it up for questions, I think. Please feel free.
Absolutely.
To enter your questions in the comments.
Right. And as you're talking about, as you can throw in those questions, I just wanted to share, you find people who are mission aligned in, of course, every single place. So Rushika and I are friends because our daughters are best friends and in school together. And, there was a moment where we started talking. And then, of course, there was all this alignment around what we do and how we want the world to continue to be better. So continue to build relationships with everyone and anyone. I wish that our daughters were here with us and then they could be part of this webinar and see what they've learned. But I'm so thankful that Rushika, that you joined me today. I think I'm so excited. So what other questions can we answer? Our emails are here if you want to follow up with either of us or both of us. We are happy to do so. Should we talk about Ann Arbor? We both live in Ann Arbor, and it's like the greatest city ever. Go Blue. Rushika, what's your favorite part about living in Ann Arbor?
I really it does feel a bit like a global city. I like being able to walk down the street downtown and just, hear people speaking different languages. And, it almost feels like I love the diversity. It's not as diverse as I ideally want it to be, of course, but
we always want it more.
Yeah, but I think that's my favorite part about being here and raising a family here.
Great.
Mm-hmm. How about you?
I will agree, actually. It feels like a big town and a small town all at the same time, I would say. Mm-hmm. Okay, we have 2 more questions. One of the things I struggle with is pay equity. What are your thoughts about when an organization lists the range, but then you find the most amazing candidate who wants more than the posted salary range? Woo! We deal with this all the time, because I think that we are really working hard on pay equity. And as we know in the world, the stereotype, of course, is that men ask for more and women ask for the range. And I think the way that I would combat that is to say to kind of push even further into what I just said about continuing to ask what they need in order to be able to make the change. And so for some folks, it would be more salary. And for some folks, it's other benefits. I think the key here is either that you're very confident in the range and you're very confident in what you can do, or you have some wiggle room. And I think for you to say that there is some wiggle room, again, that goes back to the honesty and transparency. So if there is the wiggle room, if your range is this certain range and there's some wiggle room and your CEO has said that there's a little bit of wiggle room, you can tell the candidate there's a little bit of wiggle room. I don't know how much, but that there is a little bit of wiggle room. But I would say that to every candidate, not just the candidate that asked the question, to go back to equity. I don't know, Rushika, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, this is a challenging question because, the market is competitive and we want to be able to provide really competitive, packages to recruit the best talent. But equity, for me, equity has to be a non-negotiable. And so, as an equity officer working in an organization, working with HR leaders, working with leadership, you have to be, very clear around what the data looks like, what the historical trends have been, where the wiggle room is, how it's been mobilized in various scenarios, and to make sure that it's mobilized in very even ways. And so this is an internal transparency question. And, but I do think, with a really strong advocacy, with an aligned leadership and operational leadership as well, you can often provide in creative ways packages for, for applicants that are compelling. And some of those non-salary related benefits, right, that you learn about during your intake conversation with them around, what are they looking for in their career? What kind of culture are they looking for? What kinds of opportunities for growth in their own position?
That's great. Yes.
As you're learning about those things, to lean into wanting to do that as well.
That's great. Wonderful. Yay. Okay, folks. Well, the last thing we just wanted to share is that this is recorded. And so if there are folks that you think this would be helpful for, we are excited to have the recording. It will be on the DRG LinkedIn page. If anybody wants to watch or share the recording, that would be, we would love that, of course. And our emails are here. If you have any further questions, we would be more than happy to answer and continue to help and support you as you find your best talent. And if you come to Ann Arbor, come visit us. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.